It was a typical Tuesday morning at JFK Airport. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, casting soft golden rays across the terminals. People rushed around, dragging suitcases behind them, sipping coffee from paper cups and chatting on their phones. Among the crowd were two young men, identical twins in their mid-20s. They stood out because of their matching outfits, sleek black suits paired with polished shoes. Their confidence made it clear that they weren't your average travelers. These guys meant business. The twins had big plans for the day. They were headed to Atlanta for an important meeting with a client who could potentially change the trajectory of their careers. Both worked as marketing consultants, and while they might look alike, each brought something unique to the table. One was great at crunching numbers and strategizing campaigns, while the other excelled at creative ideas and connecting with people. Together, they formed a powerhouse team. As they approached the gate for boarding, everything seemed normal. The line moved steadily, and soon enough they handed over their tickets and IDs to the gate agent. That's when things took a turn. Instead of the usual nod and smile that comes with being cleared for boarding, the agent paused. She glanced down at the tickets, then back up at the twins, her expression unreadable. "There seems to be an issue," she said flatly. "What kind of issue?" one of the twins asked politely, though his tone carried a hint of concern. He leaned closer to get a better look at the screen. "Your seats have been reassigned," the agent replied, without looking him in the eye. Her voice lacked warmth, almost robotic. The brothers exchanged confused glances. Reassigned? How could that even happen? They'd booked first-class tickets weeks ago, double-checked everything the night before, and arrived early to avoid any last-minute stress. This didn't make sense. When they pressed for answers, the agent simply shrugged. "I'm sorry, but those are the rules." It was vague, dismissive, and left more questions than answers. Frustration bubbled beneath the surface, but they tried to stay calm. After all, this wasn't the time or place to lose their cool, but the situation only got worse. A supervisor appeared, flanked by security personnel. Without offering any real explanation, they claimed there had been complaints about suspicious behavior. Suspicious behavior? The twins hadn't done anything remotely suspicious. They were just standing there, minding their own business, waiting to board their flight like everyone else. One of the twins stepped forward, trying once again to reason with the staff. "We haven't caused any trouble," he said firmly yet respectfully. "Why are you doing this?" His words hung in the air, unanswered. It was painfully obvious what was happening here. This wasn't about rules or complaints, it was about prejudice. Despite their best efforts, the twins found themselves stuck at the gate, humiliated and angry. Other passengers watched curiously, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others scrolling through their phones, oblivious to the tension building nearby. For the twins, this moment felt surreal. They weren't strangers to discrimination, but experiencing it firsthand in such a blatant way was jarring. Finally, one of them pulled out his phone. There was someone they knew would understand exactly how serious this was, and more importantly, someone who wouldn't let it slide. As he dialed the number, his hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing what was coming next. Whatever happened after this call, one thing was certain. This wasn't going to end quietly. Little did anyone at the airport know, including the airline staff involved, that this seemingly ordinary morning was about to spiral into something extraordinary. Because sometimes, when life hands you unfairness, the right person stepping in can flip the script entirely. And today that person was about to show up in a way no one expected. The phone rang twice before it was answered. On the other end, a deep, authoritative voice came through the speaker. "Hello?" The tone was calm, but carried an unmistakable weight. This was someone who commanded respect without having to try too hard. "Dad," one of the twins began, his voice tight with frustration and anger. He quickly explained what had happened at the gate, the tickets, the vague excuses, the security guard showing up out of nowhere. Each detail poured out faster than the last, as if he couldn't get the words out quickly enough. His brother stood close by, listening intently, his jaw clenched in quiet rage. For a few seconds, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then, the voice spoke again, slower this time, laced with controlled fury. "Are you telling me they refuse to let you board because of how you look?" The twin nodded even though his father couldn't see him. "Yeah, Dad, that's exactly what happened." There was another pause, longer this time. When the father finally spoke, his tone had shifted. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was determination. "Stay where you are," he said firmly. "Don't move. Don't say another word to them until I get there." The call ended and the twins exchanged glances. They knew their dad well enough to understand that when he got like this, quiet, deliberate, focused, it meant something big was about to happen. But neither of them could have predicted just how far-reaching his response would be. Meanwhile, miles away from the chaos unfolding at JFK, Elijah Johnson sat in his corner office overlooking Manhattan. Known for building Skylink Airlines into one of the largest aviation companies in the world, Elijah wasn't your typical CEO. He hadn't been born into wealth or privilege. Instead, he'd clawed his way up from nothing, working multiple jobs while putting himself through school. Every success he achieved was hard-earned, and he never forgot where he came from. That morning, Elijah had planned to spend the day reviewing quarterly reports and meeting with executives about expanding routes overseas. But now, none of that mattered. As soon as he hung up the phone, he sprang into action. First, he called his personal assistant. "Cancel everything on my schedule," he instructed sharply, "and book me a car to JFK, now." While waiting for the car, Elijah paced across his office, replaying the conversation in his mind. He thought about his sons, how hard they worked, how proud he was of everything they'd accomplished. And he thought about all the times he'd warned them about the kind of discrimination they might face in the world. But hearing it firsthand, knowing they were sitting at an airport being treated like criminals simply because of the color of their skin, ignited a fire inside him that couldn't be extinguished. When the car arrived, Elijah didn't waste a second. He grabbed his coat and briefcase and headed downstairs. Sitting in the back seat, he opened his laptop and started typing furiously. Within minutes, he sent a series of emails to key members of his team. One went to his head of operations, another to his PR department, and a third to his legal advisors. The message was clear. Something major was about to go down, and everyone needed to be ready. As the car sped toward JFK, Elijah's mind raced. He knew the airline responsible for the incident wasn't directly under his control, it was a competitor, but that didn't matter. What mattered was sending a message loud and clear. No one messed with his family, and no one got away with treating people unfairly. By the time he reached the airport, Elijah was already formulating a plan. This wasn't just about his sons anymore. It was about every passenger who had ever been made to feel small, invisible, or unworthy because of their race. If the system couldn't protect them, then he would shut it down himself. Elijah walked into the terminal with purpose. His presence alone drew attention. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a sharp navy suit, he exuded authority. People turned to look, whispering among themselves. Some recognized him immediately, while others simply sensed that whoever this man was, he meant business. At Gate 17, the scene of the incident, the twins spotted him right away. For a moment, all the frustration and humiliation melted away. Seeing their dad striding toward them, his expression unreadable but his intent undeniable, gave them a sense of relief they hadn't felt since the ordeal began. Elijah stopped in front of them, took a deep breath, and pulled them both into a quick hug. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. They nodded, though their expressions told a different story. They were still upset, still processing everything that had happened. But they also knew better than to doubt their father's ability to handle things. Turning to the gate agents, Elijah's demeanor changed instantly. Gone was the warmth he'd shown his sons. In its place was a steely resolve that made even the most seasoned employees take a step back. "What happened here is unacceptable," he declared, his voice cutting through the noise of the busy terminal. "Not only did your staff discriminate against my sons, but they also violated federal law. You will provide me with full documentation of this event, And if anyone tries to cover it up, trust me, I have the resources to find out. The gate agents looked at each other nervously, unsure of how to respond. One of them stammered an apology, but Elijah cut her off mid-sentence. Apologies aren't enough, he snapped. This isn't just about my sons. It's about every passenger who has ever been treated unfairly because of their race. Until you prove to me that real change is happening, Skylink will continue grounding your planes. His words reverberated through the terminal, drawing stares from nearby passengers. Some clapped quietly, while others recorded the exchange on their phones. Word spread quickly, and within minutes social media platforms lit up with posts about the dramatic confrontation. Back at Skylink headquarters, Elijah's orders were already being carried out. Domestic flights were grounded, international departures rerouted, and customer service lines flooded with inquiries. News outlets scrambled to report on the sudden disruption, speculating wildly about mechanical failures or labor strikes. No one suspected the truth. Not yet. But Elijah didn't care about the speculation. All that mattered to him was making sure the airline responsible for the incident understood the gravity of their actions. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a wake-up call. And if they refused to listen, Elijah was prepared to escalate further. Standing there in the terminal, surrounded by murmurs of disbelief and admiration, Elijah felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger burned inside him, yes, but so did pride, for his sons, for standing up despite the odds, and for himself, for refusing to stay silent. Sometimes, justice required bold moves, and today, Elijah Johnson was proving that he wasn't afraid to make them. Back at Skylink Airlines' headquarters, the atmosphere was electric. The moment Elijah's orders hit the operations control center, chaos erupted. Dozens of employees who had been quietly monitoring flight statuses across the globe suddenly found themselves scrambling to execute a directive they'd never imagined possible, grounding every single domestic flight immediately. The head of operations, a seasoned manager named Greg, stared at his screen in disbelief. His phone buzzed nonstop with alerts and messages from regional managers, pilots, and ground staff. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. But one look at the email from Elijah, short, direct, and impossible to ignore, told him there was no room for debate. This wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. Greg grabbed the nearest microphone connected to the intercom system. "Attention all teams," he announced, his voice tight with urgency. "Effective immediately, all domestic flights are grounded. Repeat, all domestic flights are grounded until further notice." The announcement sent shockwaves through the building. Employees exchanged bewildered glances, whispering frantically about what could have caused such a drastic move. Was it a technical issue? A security threat? No one knew, but everyone felt the weight of the decision. Grounding flights wasn't just inconvenient. It was costly, disruptive, and potentially damaging to the company's reputation. Yet here they were, doing exactly that because their CEO had said so. As news of the shutdown spread, passengers at airports nationwide began to feel the ripple effects. Gates that should have been bustling with activity were eerily quiet. Screens displaying departure times flickered with updates, delayed, canceled, or simply blank spaces where flight information used to be. Confused travelers gathered around customer service counters demanding answers. Some vented their frustrations loudly, while others paced back and forth checking their phones for any clue about when, or if, they'd be able to leave. Social media exploded almost instantly. Hashtags like "Chuck Skylink down" and "Flight Crisis" started trending as people shared photos of empty terminals and stranded families. Speculation ran wild. Was this a mechanical failure, a labor dispute, a cyber attack? No one had the full picture yet, but theories multiplied by the minute. Reporters camped outside major airports, microphones in hand, interviewing disgruntled passengers. One woman holding a crying toddler told the camera, "I've been stuck here for hours with no explanation. My kid needs to eat, I need to sleep, and I just want to go home." Another man dressed in a business suit looked visibly stressed. "I have a meeting tomorrow morning in Chicago. If I miss it, my company loses millions. Who do I even talk to about this?" Amid the confusion, Elijah Johnson arrived at JFK Airport less than an hour after issuing his command. He stepped out of his car with the kind of presence that turned heads. Tall, impeccably dressed, and radiating authority, he moved through the terminal like a force of nature. People stopped, mid-conversation, to watch him pass, sensing that something monumental was unfolding before their eyes. Elijah didn't waste time. He marched straight to Gate 17, where his sons were still waiting. When he saw them, his expression softened briefly. For a split second, he allowed himself to feel relief. They were safe, though clearly shaken. Then, turning to face the gate, agents, his demeanor hardened again. "What happened here is unacceptable," Elijah declared, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Not only did your staff discriminate against my sons, but they also violated federal law. You will provide me with full documentation of this event, and if anyone tries to cover it up, trust me, I have the resources to find out." The gate. Agents froze, caught off guard by the intensity of his words. One of them stammered an apology, but Elijah cut her off mid-sentence. "Apologies aren't enough," he snapped. "This isn't just about my sons, it's about every passenger who has ever been treated unfairly because of their race. Until you prove to me that real change is happening, Skylink will continue grounding your planes." His declaration drew gasps from nearby onlookers. Some clapped quietly, while others recorded the exchange on their phones. Word of Elijah's confrontation spread quickly, not just among passengers, but also online. Videos of the scene went viral, within minutes sparking outrage and admiration in equal measure. Back at the airline responsible for the incident, panic set in. Executives scrambled to assess the damage. Calls poured in from shareholders, journalists, and angry customers. The CEO of the rival airline, a man known for his polished demeanor and careful PR strategies, was blindsided. He hadn't anticipated this level of retaliation. Desperate to contain the fallout, the rival airline issued a public statement apologizing for the incident and promising an investigation. But Elijah wasn't satisfied. To him, apologies were meaningless without action. He knew firsthand how easy it was for companies to pay lip service to equality while continuing harmful practices behind closed doors. By late afternoon, the situation had escalated beyond anything anyone could have predicted. Passengers stranded at airports grew increasingly restless. Protesters began gathering outside terminals, holding signs that read "No racism in the skies" and chanting slogans about justice. Celebrities and influencers joined the conversation online, amplifying calls for accountability. Even politicians weighed in, urging airlines to address systemic issues of discrimination. For Elijah, however, the fight was far from over. He returned to Skylink headquarters to oversee the next phase of his plan. Sitting in a conference room with his top executives, he outlined a bold initiative aimed at addressing racial bias in air travel, dubbed the Dignity in Travel Initiative. It would partner with civil rights organizations to create tools for reporting discriminatory practices anonymously. It would also push for stricter enforcement of anti-discrimination laws and advocate for diversity training programs across the industry. "This isn't just about punishing one airline," Elijah told his team. "It's about creating lasting change. We can't let incidents like this happen again. Not to my sons, not to anyone." As the day wore on, the impact of Elijah's actions became undeniable. The rival airline's stock price plummeted, and its reputation took a massive hit. Meanwhile, Skylink's name appeared alongside headlines praising Elijah's leadership and commitment to justice. Though some critics accused him of being too extreme, the overwhelming majority supported his stance. For the twins, watching their father take on such a powerful adversary was both awe-inspiring and humbling. They realized that this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about setting an example, showing the world that standing up against injustice wasn't just necessary, it was possible. That evening, as Elijah sat alone in his office overlooking Manhattan, he reflected on everything that had transpired. He thought about his sons, their resilience and the courage it must have taken for them to endure the humiliation at the gate. He thought about the countless others who had faced similar treatment but hadn't had someone willing to fight for them. And he thought about the long road ahead, the work that still needed to be done to ensure true equality in travel and beyond. Despite the challenges, Elijah felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Sometimes, shutting down the system was the only way to fix it, and today he had proven that even the most entrenched systems could be shaken to their core. By the time Elijah walked into the operations control center at Skylink headquarters, the tension in the room was palpable. Screens displayed flight statuses flashing red across the board. Canceled, delayed, rerouted. Phones rang non-stop as regional managers and airport staff tried to make sense of the sudden shutdown. Employees darted back and forth, some typing furiously on keyboards, others huddled in corners discussing contingency plans. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos, and that was exactly how Elijah wanted it. He stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, surveying the scene with a mix of authority and calm. Despite the storm he had unleashed, he looked completely composed. His team knew better than to question him directly, but whispers filled the air. "What's going on?" one employee murmured to another. Did something happen with the CEO's family? Elijah didn't need to explain himself, he rarely did. Instead, he turned to his senior leadership team and gave them a simple directive. Keep the pressure on. Every flight stays grounded until we get answers. Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and left the room. There was still work to be done elsewhere. Back at JFK Airport, the mood among passengers had shifted from confusion to frustration. Lines stretched endlessly at customer service counters, where harried agents struggled to keep up with the flood of complaints. Some travelers sat slumped in chairs, scrolling through their phones or staring blankly at departure boards that refused to update. Others paced anxiously, muttering under their breath about missed connections and ruined plans. In the midst of this chaos, Elijah approached Gate 17 once again. This time, he wasn't alone. Flanked by members of his legal team and PR advisors, he cut an imposing figure. Passengers who recognized him from news reports or social media videos stopped what they were doing to watch. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Is that really him? The Skylink CEO? The gate agents, already on edge after Elijah's earlier confrontation, looked visibly nervous when they saw him returning. One of them, a young woman barely out of her 20s, visibly paled as Elijah locked eyes with her. She fumbled with a stack of papers on the counter, trying to appear busy, but it was clear she was avoiding his gaze. Elijah wasted no time getting to the point. "Where's your manager?" he asked sharply, addressing the group of agents. When none of them responded immediately, he repeated the question louder, his voice echoing slightly in the crowded terminal. Finally, one of the agents pointed toward a door marked "Staff Only." Without hesitation, Elijah pushed past the counter and headed straight for the door. His entourage followed closely behind him, drawing stares from curious onlookers. Inside the small office, the regional manager stood up quickly, clearly startled by the unexpected intrusion. "Mr. Johnson," the manager stammered, extending a hand that Elijah ignored. We're so sorry about the misunderstanding earlier. We're looking into it, I promise." "There's no misunderstanding," Elijah shot back, his tone icy. "Your staff discriminated against my sons, plain and simple. And now you're going to tell me exactly what happened, or I'll make sure the entire world knows how your airline treats its passengers." The manager swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He glanced nervously at the lawyers, standing beside Elijah, who wore expressions that made it clear they weren't there to negotiate. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The silence was deafening. Finally, the manager broke. "Look, Mr. Johnson, we'll cooperate fully," he said, his voice trembling. "We'll pull the security footage, review the incident logs, do whatever it takes to get to the bottom of this. But please, can we talk about resolving this privately? Grounding flights is causing massive disruptions, not just for us, but for thousands of passengers." Elijah leaned forward, resting both hands on the desk. His face was inches away from the manager's now. "That's the point," he said quietly, though his words carried immense weight. "You care more about inconvenience than justice. You think grounding flights is bad? Try being treated like a criminal because of the color of your skin. Try having your dignity stripped away in front of hundreds of people. That's what happened to my sons today, and it happens to countless others every single day. The manager opened his mouth to respond, but thought better of it. Instead, he nodded weakly, defeated. Elijah straightened up and motioned for his lamb team to follow him out of the office. As they exited, the crowd outside erupted into applause. Strangers patted Elijah on the back, thanking him for standing up not just for his family, but for everyone who had ever been mistreated while traveling. Later that evening, Elijah held a press conference broadcast live to millions of viewers around the world. Standing behind a podium emblazoned with the Skylink logo, he addressed the media with the same unwavering resolve he'd shown throughout the day. What happened today at JFK Airport was unacceptable, he began, his voice steady and commanding. My sons were denied boarding not because of anything they did, but because of the color of their skin. This kind of discrimination has no place in our society, and certainly no place in the aviation industry. He went on to outline the steps Skylink would take to address the issue. First, he announced the creation of the Dignity in Travel Initiative, a coalition aimed at combating racial bias in air travel. Partnering with civil rights organizations, the initiative would provide passengers with tools to report discriminatory practices anonymously. Second, Elijah vowed to hold airlines accountable, not just through lawsuits, but by empowering consumers to demand better treatment. This isn't just about one airline or one incident, he emphasized. It's about creating systemic change. If we don't address these issues head-on, they will continue to harm innocent people, and that's something I refuse to accept. As Elijah spoke, cameras flashed and reporters scribbled notes furiously. Social media lit up with reactions to his speech. Some praised his boldness, calling him a hero for taking a stand against injustice. Others criticized him for disrupting travel for thousands of passengers, arguing that his actions were too extreme. But Elijah didn't care about the backlash. To him, the ends justified the means. Meanwhile, the rival airline scrambled to contain the damage. Executives convened emergency meetings, drafting public apologies and outlining policy changes designed to appease critics. They promised to implement mandatory diversity training for all employees and establish stricter enforcement of anti-discrimination laws. But even as they rolled out these measures, skepticism lingered. Many doubted whether the changes were genuine or merely a PR stunt to salvage their tarnished reputation. For Elijah, however, the real victory lay not in punishing the rival airline, but in sparking a broader conversation. By grounding flights and refusing to back down, he had forced the aviation industry to confront a deeply ingrained problem. Discrimination wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a pattern, one that needed to be dismantled piece by piece. That night, as Elijah returned home, he found his sons waiting for him in the living room. They looked exhausted but relieved. "Dad," one of them said softly, "you didn't have to do all this for us." Elijah smiled faintly, sinking into a chair across from them. "Yes, I did," he replied, "because if I hadn't, who would? This fight isn't just about you, it's about making sure no one else has to go through what you did today." The OI. Twins exchanged glances, then nodded silently. They understood now that their father's actions weren't just personal. They were part of a larger mission. A mission to create a world where everyone could travel with dignity, regardless of the color of their skin. The days following Elijah's dramatic intervention at JFK Airport felt like a whirlwind. News outlets couldn't stop talking about it. Headlines screamed from every corner. CEO shuts down flights over discrimination, Skylink takes a stand against bias, and airline industry faces reckoning. Social media was ablaze with opinions, hashtags like "Justice in Travel" trending for days on end. People were divided. Some praised Elijah as a hero, while others accused him of overreacting or causing unnecessary disruption. But one thing was undeniable. The conversation had begun, and there was no turning back. For the rival airline, the fallout was devastating. Their stock price plummeted overnight, wiping out billions in market value. Calls poured into their customer service lines, Not just complaints about canceled flights, but angry demands for accountability. Passengers shared stories online of similar experiences they'd endured, flooding comment sections with tales of discrimination, humiliation, and frustration. Protesters gathered outside major airports, holding signs that read, "No racism in Babi Dainshed, the skies," and chanting slogans about equality. The airline's executives scrambled to contain the damage, issuing public apologies and promising sweeping reforms. But skepticism lingered. Many doubted whether their promises were genuine or simply an attempt to save face. Elijah watched all of this unfold with a mix of satisfaction and resolve. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Grounding flights and sparking outrage was just the first step. Real change would require sustained effort. So he didn't let up. Instead, he doubled down on his mission, using Skylink's platform to push for systemic reform across the aviation industry. One of his boldest moves came when he announced the launch of the Dignity in Travel Initiative, DTI. At its core, DTI was designed to empower passengers and hold airlines accountable. It partnered with civil rights organizations, advocacy groups, and legal experts to create tools for reporting discriminatory practices anonymously. Passengers could submit complaints through a secure app, ensuring their voices were heard without fear of retaliation. Additionally, DTI worked to establish stricter enforcement mechanisms, pushing regulators to impose heavier penalties on airlines found guilty of bias. To get the initiative off the ground, Elijah hosted a high-profile summit at Skylink headquarters. Leaders from various industries, aviation, technology, law, and activism, gathered to discuss solutions. The event was streamed live worldwide, drawing millions of viewers eager to see what concrete steps would emerge. As Elijah addressed the audience during the opening remarks, his tone was both passionate and pragmatic. "This isn't about revenge or punishment," he said, standing tall behind the podium. "It's about creating a system where everyone feels respected and valued. When you walk into an airport, buy a ticket, or board a plane, your race, gender, religion, or background shouldn't determine how you're treated. That's not too much to ask. And yet for far too many people, it's still a distant dream." His words resonated deeply, earning applause from the crowd. Speakers who followed echoed his sentiments, sharing personal stories of discrimination and proposing actionable strategies to combat it. By the end of the summit, several airlines had pledged to adopt DTI's recommendations, including mandatory diversity training, transparent complaint processes, and regular audits to ensure compliance. But Elijah didn't stop there. He understood that meaningful change required more than policy updates. It needed cultural shifts within organizations. To drive this point home, he introduced a new program called Empathy in Action for Skylink employees. The initiative focused on fostering understanding and empathy among staff members, encouraging them to view situations from passengers' perspectives. Training sessions included role-playing exercises, workshops led by diversity experts, and testimonials from individuals who had experienced discrimination firsthand. Employees initially greeted the program with mixed reactions. Some embraced it wholeheartedly, recognizing its importance. Others grumbled, viewing it as unnecessary or inconvenient. But Elijah made sure participation was non-negotiable. "If you work for Skylink," he told his team during an all-hands meeting, "you represent our values, and those values include treating every single person with dignity and respect." As weeks turned into months, the impact of these efforts became increasingly evident. Passenger feedback improved significantly, with fewer reports of discriminatory incidents on Skylink flights. Other airlines began to take notice, adopting similar measures in hopes of regaining public trust. Slowly, but surely the industry started to shift. Of course, not everyone welcomed the changes. Critics argued that Elijah's approach was heavy-handed, accusing him of using his influence to bully competitors. Some even questioned whether grounding flights had been justified, pointing to the thousands of stranded passengers whose travel plans were disrupted. Elijah acknowledged their concerns but remained unapologetic. Was it inconvenient? Yes, he admitted during an interview with a popular news network. But sometimes inconvenience is necessary to spark change. If grounding flights for a day forces people to confront the reality of discrimination, then I'll do it again tomorrow if I have to. Despite the backlash, public opinion largely favored Elijah. Polls showed overwhelming support for his stance, with many praising him for taking a stand against injustice. Celebrities, activists, and politicians joined the chorus, amplifying calls for accountability and reform. Even some of his toughest critics softened their tone after witnessing the tangible improvements brought about by DTI. For the twins, life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such a life-altering experience. They resumed their work as marketing consultants, but something had shifted. Inspired by their father's actions, they threw themselves into advocacy work, dedicating countless hours to promoting DTI's mission. Whether speaking at conferences, appearing on talk shows, or mentoring young professionals, they used their platform to amplify marginalized voices and push for progress. Their bond with their father grew stronger too. They saw him in a new light, not just as a successful businessman, but as a man driven by principle and purpose. Late-night conversations around the dinner table often revolved around the challenges and triumphs of their shared journey. There were moments of laughter, moments of reflection, and moments of quiet pride. Through it all, they remained united, bound by a common goal. By the time the anniversary of the incident rolled around, the landscape of air travel had transformed dramatically. Airlines that once resisted change now embraced it, implementing policies and practices aimed at fostering inclusivity. Passengers reported feeling safer and more respected, knowing they had avenues to report misconduct without fear of reprisal. While discrimination hadn't disappeared entirely, significant strides had been made toward leveling the playing field. Looking back, Elijah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew the fight wasn't over. It might never truly be, but he also knew they were moving in the right direction. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to relax, sitting on the balcony of his Manhattan penthouse with a cup of coffee in hand. Below him, the city buzzed with life, a reminder of how interconnected the world truly was. As he gazed out at the skyline, Elijah thought about the lessons learned along the way. He thought about resilience, the kind his sons had shown when faced with adversity. He thought about courage, the kind it took to challenge powerful systems and demand better. And he thought about hope, the belief that even the smallest actions could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he might never fully understand. For Elijah, this wasn't just a story about justice. It was a story about humanity. It was about standing up, speaking out, and refusing to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. Because sometimes shutting down the system was the only way to fix it. And today, Elijah Johnson had proven that change was possible, if you were willing to fight for it. Months had passed since that chaotic morning at JFK Airport, but the impact of Elijah's actions continued to ripple through the aviation industry and beyond. What started as a personal fight for justice had grown into something much bigger. A movement. A movement that reminded everyone involved, from airline executives to everyday passengers, that fairness and dignity weren't just ideals. They were rights worth fighting for. For Elijah, stepping back from the whirlwind of media attention and public scrutiny was both a relief and a challenge. The initial wave of headlines had died down, replaced by quieter yet equally important conversations about accountability and change. People were no longer asking if discrimination existed in air travel. They were asking how to fix it. And Elijah, along with his team at Skylink, was determined to lead the charge. One evening, after another long day of meetings and strategy sessions, Elijah found himself sitting alone in his office. It was late, and the city outside sparkled with lights, a reminder of how vast and interconnected the world truly was. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a deep sigh. For once, there were no urgent phone calls or emails demanding his attention. Just quiet. As he reflected on everything that had happened, Elijah couldn't help but smile. His sons, those two young men who had faced such blatant prejudice, had grown so much over the past few months. They weren't just consultants anymore. They were advocates, changemakers. Their passion for justice inspired him daily, reminding him why he'd built Skylink in the first place, not just to connect people across distances, but to create a space where everyone felt welcome. The twins were thriving in their new roles. They traveled often now, not just for work but also to speak at conferences and workshops about the importance of equity in travel. At first, they had been hesitant, unsure if they wanted to relive the pain of that day at the airport. But as they shared their story with audiences around the country, they realized something powerful. Their experience wasn't unique. Far too many people had similar stories buried inside them, waiting to be told. By speaking up, the twins gave others permission to do the same. Their advocacy work extended beyond speeches and interviews. Together, they helped develop educational materials for DTI, creating videos, pamphlets, and training modules designed to teach airline staff how to recognize and address bias. One of their proudest achievements was a short film titled Through Their Eyes, which followed real passengers as they recounted moments of discrimination during air travel. The film premiered at an international aviation conference and left attendees visibly moved. Some even approached the twins afterward, tears in their eyes, thanking them for shedding light on an issue that had long been ignored. Back at Skylink, Elijah's efforts to foster inclusivity within the company began paying off. Employee morale soared as workers embraced the Empathy in Action program. Stories poured in from frontline staff about how the training had transformed their interactions with passengers. One gate agent wrote a heartfelt letter describing how she'd helped a nervous traveler calm down before a flight, simply by taking the time to listen. Another baggage handler shared how he'd gone out of his way to assist an elderly passenger struggling with her luggage. These small acts of kindness added up, creating a culture of care that spread throughout the organization. But perhaps the most surprising outcome of all was the shift in public perception. Once criticized for grounding flights and disrupting travel plans, Elijah was now hailed as a visionary leader. Passengers praised Skylink for its commitment to fairness. Loyalty programs saw record sign-ups, and customer satisfaction ratings hit an all-time high. Even competitors began adopting similar initiatives, realizing that ignoring the call for change was no longer an option. Still, Elijah knew better than to rest on his laurels. Change, he understood, was never permanent unless actively maintained. So he kept pushing forward, always looking for ways to improve. One of his latest projects involved partnering with tech companies to develop AI-powered tools capable of detecting subtle signs of bias in customer service interactions. If a passenger reported feeling uncomfortable or disrespected, the system would flag the incident for review, ensuring nothing slipped through the cracks. Despite the progress, there were still challenges. Not every airline welcomed the changes enthusiastically. Some resisted, arguing that stricter regulations would hurt profits or complicate operations. Others paid lip service to diversity without making any real effort to implement meaningful reforms. Elijah didn't shy away from calling them out, using his influence to keep the pressure on. "If you're not part of the solution," he often said, "you're part of the problem." Even within Skylink, there were occasional setbacks. A few employees grumbled about the extra training requirements, while some passengers complained about longer wait times due to increased security checks. But Elijah remained steadfast. "This isn't about convenience," he reminded his team during a town hall meeting. "It's about doing what's right. We owe it to our passengers and to each other to get this right." As the year drew to a close, Elijah decided it was time to celebrate the victories, big and small. He organized a special event at Skylink headquarters, inviting employees, partners, and community leaders to join him in reflecting on the journey so far. The gathering was intimate yet powerful, filled with heartfelt speeches, laughter, and even a few tears. During his remarks, Elijah took a moment to thank his sons publicly. "None of this would have been possible without you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't choose to stand up that day at the airport, it chose you. And because of your courage, we've been able to make a difference. I'm proud of you, not just as a father but as someone who believes in a better future." The room erupted in applause, and the twins exchanged a glance, their faces glowing with pride. For all the hardships they'd endured, They wouldn't trade this moment for anything. They had turned pain into purpose, using their voices to lift others up. After the event, Elijah stood on the rooftop terrace of Skylink's building, gazing out at the glittering city below. The cool night air brushed against his face, carrying with it a sense of peace. He thought about the countless lives touched by the Dignity in Travel initiative, the families reunited without fear, the travelers treated with respect regardless of their background, the employees empowered to do better, and he thought about the road ahead. There was still work to be done, battles to fight, and hearts to win over. But for the first time in a long time, Elijah felt hopeful. Hopeful that the world was waking up to the fact that equality wasn't just a buzzword. It was a promise that every person, no matter who they were or where they came from, deserved to be treated with dignity. As he turned to leave, Elijah paused for one last look at the skyline. Somewhere out there, planes were taking off and landing, carrying passengers bound for destinations near and far. Each flight represented more than just a journey. It represented connection, possibility, and hope. And thanks to the efforts of one man and his family, those journeys were becoming fairer, kinder, and more inclusive with each passing day. Elijah smiled to himself as he walked back inside. The fight wasn't over, but it was worth it. Every step, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, it was all worth it. Because sometimes standing up for what's right doesn't just change an industry, it changes the world. And Elijah Johnson was living proof of that.